everyone, and welcome to this evening's Literary Nights with Unsolicited Press. Before we begin, I want to remind everyone to smash the like button, follow us, hit the heart button on Instagram. Definitely follow us on Instagram and subscribe on YouTube. Tonight we have two great writers with us, Sommer Schafer and Gabriella D'Italia. We usually go in alphabetical order by first name. So Gabriella is going to read from her book this evening, which is nonfiction, and I think is it this one? Nope, wrong one. Sorry about that. Getting Dressed in the Dark. This is her book, Getting Dressed in the Dark. And then tonight, Summer is going to read from her book, which is Hope. And I believe both of these books are newly born. So welcome, ladies. Welcome everyone out there who is listening tonight. And let's begin. So Gabriella, you're G, so that means you come before SS. So would you like to tell us about your book? And we're going to hear you read a little bit of it tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to. Getting Dressed in the Dark, An Artist's Way Home is my artist memoir, which did in fact just come out at the end of last month. Most of my professional background is as a visual artist, and so this book is deeply about creativity and healing. And I was thinking about what I wanted to read tonight, and it's interesting. I've done a couple of readings so far, and I was thinking about the choices I made for those different readings. One was for an art exhibition I did here in New Jersey at the Center for Contemporary Art in Bedminster. And I had an exhibition of textile works and paintings on the wall. And I did a reading as part of the opening they had there. And so I picked a passage of the book that described the way that I make textiles, describes my interdisciplinary art practice, and also really talked about the intersection of those practices and my most intimate life, my most mundane life, and also intimate life. I did another reading as part of an art exhibition that was at a homestead museum, and it was a quilt exhibition, antique quilts, contemporary quilts, and I had a quilt in the show. And for that reading, I did a passage of the book that talks about an art residency I did at a contemporary art homestead. And I talked about how I first started making quilts, conventional, traditional quilts. And so I had very specific ideas about what I wanted to read for those settings. And this is the first time I've gotten to read just the book as a book. And I decided that I actually wanted to start at the beginning. So I'm going to read from the first chapter of the book.
Okay.
And it starts with me in 2016. I had just turned 40, and I would say that this first chapter is really kind of the fulcrum or the hinge on which the book kind of goes backwards and forwards and kind of reflects through this moment on kind of what brought me to the moment and what gets me out of the moment. Chapter 1, split in two. The week my parents traveled to St. Martin, leaving me alone for the first time in months, I rarely left the bathtub. I lay there until the water turned cold. I stared at the pinkish brown tiles that covered the walls and ceiling, a hard cocoon for an indeterminate and dubious stay. I couldn't cry. I sat in the graying water, hoping to thaw. I was hoping to become fluid, commensurate, a part of the world again, if only in texture. That would be a start. Episodes of Bored to Death flickered from a Kindle poised at the edge of the tub. The tub was also pinkish brown, matching the tiles. This improvised cocoon was located neatly at the center of an impervious house, the 5-bedroom colonial where I grew up in Morristown, New Jersey. The shine of stainless steel stock pots, spotless windows, and dustless bureaus alerted even the most casual observer to the spell cast here. Imperviousness ran through each one of 6 identical pie plates, 5 frying pans, 20 mixing bowls, 4 full sets of dishes, 10 baking sheets, and countless glasses lined up in neat rows in each of 2 china cabinets, one yellow chinoiserie and the other mahogany. There were more still in the kitchen cupboards. If anything was broken or tarnished, something would immediately take its place, pristine. There was no soft underbelly, no moment of absence suggesting uncertainty, just a hydra of things. I had no mechanism for grief. I left Maine in a blur of violence just a handful of fleeting and interminable months earlier. I can't be sure of timelines. I didn't know then that I would never return, only that I wouldn't survive if I stayed. I could tell you stories of things that happened before and after, but inside those stories are only more stories, not reasons, not even truths, just an elaborate network of mirrors and lenses, the way I was looking at it all, the way I saw myself, everything woven together with the present bearing down on the past, just as much as the past bears down on it. I had no permanent place to live when I left. I had taken the dogs with me, all 4 of them. Petey, Pony, Buster, and Flash. Pony is a perfect animal, a black 15-pound prancing deer. He's slender like an Italian greyhound, but with huge fruit bat ears like a chihuahua, and a mysteriously docked tail, like someone tried to pass him off as a minpin. They'd obviously failed to notice his deeply sweet elegance. He's ferociously fast, catching sight of a squirrel or chipmunk, but falls trying to corner, his rudder removed by someone who clearly had no understanding of his purpose, his joy. Mostly we called him Prince Pony once we got to know him. Rob and I ended up with 3 more dogs. Had we gotten any of the others first, especially Petey, who on the day we brought him home walked straight through the fence that enclosed our main garden as if it wasn't there at all, while the others watched as if he'd just walked through a wall. Things probably would not have gone that way. Each one created the conditions for the next, as is the exigency of specific creatures and objects. In the pre-dawn darkness, Rob would head downstairs to get in a couple of hours of writing before daybreak. He would rekindle the fire in the wood stove and let Pony, Petey, Buster, and Flash out one of the glass doors I'd carefully selected to flank the white enamel stove, heating the one-room schoolhouse we called home. They'd burst from the door and race each other to the outer corners of the fenced portion of 2 acres, howling and barking fury to announce their territory to anything that may have crept in during the night. Rob would make me a latte and leave it on the yellow pine bedside table next to me. When everything happened, and despite being in no state to have living creatures depend on me, there was no way I was leaving the dogs behind with Rob. In all the ways that the story of the previous 2 decades we spent together would alternately unravel and metastasize, that the dogs would remain with me was beyond the grasp of rewritten histories. A trailer loaded with my belongings, what odd, impulsive curation of them remained, was unceremoniously dropped at a storage facility on the side of a highway in New Jersey. I had only a small window of time to unload it before a truck would come to retrieve the container. It grew dark and the storage facility closed, meaning the lights went out and the doors locked. I propped the doors open with some boxes, which slowly bent and twisted under the pressure of this task they were never intended for. I lay down on the asphalt pavement. I looked at the urban sky, never fully dark enough to reveal the thousands of glittering, massive stars left behind in Maine. I didn't bother to brush away hard bits of gravel that stuck to my face and hands. Cameron, Rob, and I had been in a relationship for the previous decade, before polyamory became mainstream nomenclature. My relationship with Cameron remained strong, albeit darkened like everything else. After all, Rob and I had traced the arc of more than half our lives together. Our time spanned and resolved an impressionable, informative 20 years. Our marriage preceded our time with Cameron. The 3 of us had always been loath to generalize about what we had, to name it. After all, the impulse to be in this relationship was a challenge to our own internalized versions of convention, even in our most intimate lives. Naming seemed just part of a strategy of justification in which we had little interest. It seemed to stifle and foreclose the expanse we'd intentionally, if not trepidatiously, entered. It was all too personal, not public enough even for words. When I left Maine, time was lifted out of its line, suspended. I was moving back and forth between my childhood home in New Jersey and Cameron's small fifth-floor walk-up in Harlem, which he shared with his best friend. I awoke before dawn and took my only pleasure of the day before the rest of life and all its unrelenting routines stirred, foreclosing the space around me. Climbing out of bed, I tried not to wake Cameron still asleep next to me and head into the kitchen. There I sat on the cold stone counter, tucking my knees to my chest and lighting a cigarette. Smoking alone, inside, in the early morning, was a luxury. That moment, delivered by the metamorphosis of tobacco wrapped in thin paper into a warm cylinder of ash and rising smoke, brought me back into my body, like two identical images resolving into one, focused. I stared out the window, allowing 3 small potted rosemary plants on the sill to blur into the periphery, toward the window in the brick wall across the air shaft. Their yellow curtains that framed that window only sometimes obscured the view inside to the mother and daughter that lived there. I lit another cigarette. Clothing was hung all around inside their apartment in a way that made everything seem maybe not temporary, but at the ready, as if they might always be preparing to go somewhere or just to leave. The curtains themselves felt ad hoc, as if they weren't intended as curtains at all, but were playing that role for a time. I only just fit there at the edge of the counter in the dim light before anyone else was awake. It felt like escape.
Wonderful. I'm looking forward to our Q&A afterwards. So, Sommer, let's talk about your book. And you're a fiction writer, so tell us a little about this book.
Oh, sure. Hi, everyone. Gabriella, that was lovely. I just want to be in that kitchen with you. It's beautiful. This book is a novel and stories about a small town in Alaska, small island town. And I guess the difference between a collection of stories and this book is that the stories are a little more connected. So there's a little bit of an overarching plot. Characters come in and out. And so the stories are connected. They're linked. I'm going to read part of the beginning of a chapter, a story called Larry and Mark, who are 2 characters in town. This town is full of characters who have rough and tumble backgrounds and are very intriguing to me. It was fun to write them because they're so peculiar and so troubled and so fabulous too.
So when was this book born? Is it already born or is it forthcoming?
It is coming November 25th.
All right. You hear that,
Yes.
everyone? November 25th.
Yes.
So we have 2 new books here. So, Sommer, looking forward to hearing.
All righty. Larry and Mark. Oh, the feeling of the gavel in his hand during city assembly meetings. Now that was something Mayor Mark Randall never got tired of. And if he happened to be just the slightest bit high, well, that helped him cut off the chief of police when he just kept going on and on about the need for more police. That helped him address the man as Dude instead of Chief Kolarski. And it certainly helped him tell the Tlingit elder, Lawrence Peters, to get with the program upon hearing that the Klan wanted city money to help build a new Klan house in the gravel parking lot by the seafood processing center. People were a fucking nuisance, he often thought during assembly meetings where he squinted his eyes in what he thought was a commanding, menacing way. He couldn't always hide, however, the way he nervously tapped his index finger on his knee, or the habit he had of jerking his head to fling his brown hair, stringy and long, despite the U-shaped baldness on top. He knew that the masses were too dumb to govern themselves. They needed a leader, that's all, not an assembly of local jackasses with their ayes and nays. He would be that leader. His older brother had made the Senate 10 years ago. Robert, the college graduate, the lawyer. Mark wondered when he'd stop hearing his father. Why can't you be more like Robert? Yeah, well, okay then, father. Mark had his eyes set on the Alaska State Senate next year and wouldn't let anything get in his way. So why was it that his oldest friend Larry had gone and ruined everything? And why was it that here he was now, digging a crater the size of his mom's two-door Honda in the open space behind his and Larry's outlaw cabin up Bearbread Mountain, big enough for all those bottles of pseudoephedrine, acetone, ammonia, and phosphorus, because there was no way in hell he was going to waste even a little of his hard-earned stash. He always thinks he's so fucking smart. Mark attacked the ground with the rusted-out shovel. Now look who's smart. He stopped to shout it at the treetops into the crisp, quiet mountain air. The thought made him realize just how muscular he actually was under all his skinniness, and he brought the shovel up and back and down with all his strength, as if it were a sledgehammer, just so that he could feel his arm and back muscles pop. Pistons, firing. God, he was good. The challenge was making any damn mark in the compact, ashy soil under the wet moss. There was also a whole bunch of god-awful roots all twisted up and commingling and conspiring down there to keep the whole ground down like the mafia. It's not as if Larry had wanted to spend the 125th night of his 30th year in Hope's one-room prison before Mark started hacking out his hole. He kind of liked the sound of it, though, drug lord. That's what Officer Schmidt said as he pushed Larry into the cell. Officer Schmidt was a total dumbass and had been since high school. But still, it had a ring to it, a certain CEO-ish feel to it. Besides the Grady boys, who didn't really count because it was their father who owned the bars and one of the gas stations, Larry was Hope's only 30-something millionaire, having the previous year transformed the empty lot at the corner of Main and Fireweed into a 3-storied megalith of cement and steel, and moved everything over from his smaller shop down the street. It was a lot his parents had bought for him for his 25th birthday, and to finally see it bear the load of his dreams was just about as perfect as it got. The other shop owners complained at city assembly meetings that Larry's radio emporium blocked the view of the ocean and didn't fit in with the cute and rustic old-fashioned look of downtown, which is what drew the tourists after all. A little modernization never hurt anyone, right? Larry had told Mark afterwards, who took pride in consistently being the sole vote, either for or against the majority, unless it was for something he was truly passionate about, like building the road across the island. Good for business, folks. Or stopping the building of the deep water dock, an eyesore and bad for the fishermen. Or capping the already ridiculously high city hospital admin salaries. Larry hadn't forgotten to build the penthouse suite atop Larry's radio emporium he had always promised himself and his parents, with stunning views of the Pyramid Mountains, the Baranov Range, and the wide open ocean past the gentle bend in the bay. One of the first things he did, even before installing the surround sound music system and the hot tub on the deck, had been to move his parents out of their old 3-bedroom ranch, the tired, wallpapered place he had grown up in, and into their very own wing of the penthouse. His dad, large, slow, and quiet, now spent most of his days lifting flat-screen TVs and 5.1 stereo systems out of boxes and into the store, taking close stock of where things were placed and if anything needed ordering. His mom, short, round, and spunky, helped Larry with the sales because the only thing she enjoyed more than seeing her son's store full of customers was listening to him explain to one the difference between Panasonic and Sony. Many times she had said to his dad, giving Larry that $50,000 to open his little store 10 years ago was the best move we made, Jack, you know? And then the lot. Remarkable boy, huh? And Jack had simply nodded because his wife always had such a good way of saying things that there was no reason to add any more. Their son was quite conceivably Hope's most successful resident ever, they conceded to each other. By senior year of high school, Larry had subscriptions to Forbes, Business World, and Money. He began buying and selling stocks on the little Mac his parents had bought him for his 16th birthday. On Thursday, March 21st, 1994, he had sold $2,000 worth of stock BXGT, making it a record-earning day that he had noted in the little journal he had labeled Stocks in black Sharpie on the cover, in which he kept religiously. Before money, he had been into chess and birding, which he still enjoyed, though he hadn't done the annual December Hope bird count since he was 20 when he had had Hope's highest count. He also played a mean trombone that he still got out occasionally to play in the bathroom because he liked the acoustics there and the big mirror. But his destiny had always been money. Before he turned 20, he had taken out loans and purchased a few cheap properties, bought a fixer-upper near the ferry terminal that he later sold for 125% of what he bought it for, and had decided that what Hope needed and what most of the Filipino cruise ship workers seemed to want when they roamed downtown was a damn good electronics store. Now, if one wanted to buy Sennheiser wireless headphones, one went to Larry. And it was at that point, when one wanted to buy Sennheiser wireless headphones and one went to Larry, that he stopped looking at himself in the mirror and seeing a short, fat, pale boy with no chin, and started seeing someone who actually knew things and was now quite rich. Drugs hadn't been a part of the plan. He had just sort of fallen into them during a trip to Hawaii the winter of '01, where he met some nice local guys who convinced him that drugs were an amazing investment, and they had a whole string of investors and buyers from Alaska all along the Pacific Islands to the Philippines. Imagine, it had turned into a nice side thing, and though he could have enjoyed his own drugs at discount, he mostly stayed away from the stuff, preferring instead to remain clear-headed. He did enjoy sex with coke, though, and liked to throw parties in his new place. And who didn't smoke marijuana? It wasn't long after Larry's third month in his new store that Private Detective Linda Booth, acting on behalf of the Hope Police Department, who had been watching closely for about a year, discovered that Larry's radio emporium was also Hope's and the outlying village's #1 source of cocaine, mushrooms, marijuana, and heroin. Linda couldn't have done it without 20-year-old Kyle Anderson, who offered to do whatever he could to bring Larry down after discovering that his girlfriend of 2 years, Stella, had been sleeping with fat old dickwad for months. It was an easy job because Kyle was one of Larry's regulars, every payday eagerly retrieving from Larry at the counter of Larry's radio emporium a sealed white envelope with his name written in black across the front, in plain daylight, in front of everyone. No one even notices, Larry had smiled, and he firmly rubbed Kyle's neck like he tended to do with people because he had read in some magazine, hadn't he, that it made people feel trusting and at ease. And no one had, until Kyle had, started caring about who was fucking his girl and how it wasn't fair that she got for free what he had to work hard for. It was both those things. And so it was nothing for Kyle to walk into Larry's penthouse one Saturday night with a wire across his chest and party like he never had before, even if it cost him 1 week's pay. The Hope PD had reimbursed him for that, but he hated the pigs as much as everyone else, and even though he wanted to rip up that check into 100 little pieces, he didn't. He went to the ATM immediately. He deposited that thing before he had it 5 minutes. The cabin would be the thing that would keep Larry from talking. His prints were all over the pots, his purple coffee mug, the toilet seat, the matches. Sometimes Larry helped Mark separate crystals into baggies, though usually Mark liked control over the whole thing. And as tempting as it was to tell their friends to bring the girls up for a night or two, they had shaken on it. It was their space, their secret. Yet there was the fact of Larry's flabby mouth and the way he could just go on and on about whatever. When Mark had been paired with Larry's sophomore year at Hope High so that Larry could tutor him in algebra, Larry wouldn't shut up about chess or birds. Had to be one or the other. Mark knew he'd shoot either himself or Larry before the semester was out. But by the time Mark had passed algebra with a C-, he had gotten used to, maybe even kind of liked, Larry's factful, innocent babblings. There was something so unpretentious and real about Larry that had sort of made Mark feel as if he didn't have to work so hard to be the cool guy, though admittedly, that mostly came naturally. Last night played through his mind like an endless repeating of a horror movie he knew would end bad. As soon as he found out that Larry had been arrested and was definitely going to get out on the $25,000 bail, because any fool knew this was chump change to Larry, he immediately left his father's transportation business where he worked as ground manager, raced home in his dark blue GT, and spent the following hour deleting every single email he and Larry had shared. The normal ones about fishing and hanging out, but also the recent ones inviting him to the penthouse parties, and especially the ones asking about the latest business, which was meth that Mark conveniently made in high-quality small batches on his 25-foot boat, the Little Lady, and also knew was being poorly made by a couple of dummies on city property at the old sawmill at the end of the road, who gave him a cut to keep it hush-hush. That night, he drove down to Sealing Harbor and efficiently dumped 5 gallons of lighter fuel over the beautiful wooden planks of the Little Lady, which had been his father's old boat. He figured he would conveniently collect insurance on the thing and upgrade finally. When he lit the match, he noticed for a moment how little impact the light of the flame had on the darkness of the harbor, how there were probably animals out there in the jet black water doing their thing without anyone seeing them at all. The flame roared into a fire immediately, and then the boat unexpectedly exploded, singeing Mark's eyebrows and nose hairs. Damn it, he had forgotten about the couple bottles on board. Must have accidentally left the hot pad on in the kitchen, he told the firefighters when the explosion awoke all the boat dwellers, and suddenly he was the attention of every loser in hope. With each shovelful and swing of soil, he felt the muscles in his arms and back tighten and move, pistons firing. Though on the water, fishing is where he really liked to be. It was peaceful there in the woods, too, just the sound of the thrushes and the tick swoosh of the shovel penetrating impossible ground, the impressive sound of his own breath, firm and steady. He was surprised to see to what degree his abilities could turn, and he knew he was past 360 degrees, that he was operating on some superhuman level of speed and efficiency and strength. Skinny, weak, my ass, he told himself, remembering suddenly all those times he'd lost to his brother wrestling, monkeying around. Then finally, to see all those precious bottles half buried like silent little children, and then to cover them, putting the earth back in its place. That was him, changing the very earth itself, planting strange new hybrid seeds among the roots. And only he would know. And it just gets better from there, let me tell you.
I must commend both of you ladies about both of your works being so compelling. So I'm going to ask you both the same question and answer it, whoever wants to answer first. What inspired each of you to write your book? What was the thing that said, "Oh, I could turn this into a book"? Who wants to go first?
You want to take it?
Sure. Yeah, so I, read really like the point in my life that in some ways the book came out of. And so I was at this kind of crisis, a midlife crisis, and I was doing a lot of things to kind of put a piece of life back together. One of those things, as I said, I did a lot of visual art, but when you're in crisis, and especially one that involves like every piece of your life, your identity, but also financially, I had moved from rural Maine into New York City, essentially. And I was like, I can't do art anymore. I don't have a studio. I'm never going to make a living. Like I can't, the cost of living is so much more. I lost my space. And I was like, I was in desperation mode. So I did so many things. I was waiting tables, and I wound up doing a kind of personal styling business, which was really intimate. In my book, I've recharacterized it, and I now really understand it as part of my creative and art practice. It wasn't picking out outfits for people. It was really like working with them on deeply personal idea of what style is. And so kind of getting to those questions and getting at what it means to have intimacy with the material world, with the things that we're closest to, whether it's food or our gardens or our homes or our clothing, and kind of, marshaling all of the kind of impulses and tools and kind of skills that I maybe took for granted in more traditional art practice, and was kind of using it in this different way. And then, a couple of years into this, I got to the point where I was kind of putting together a handbook for my clients out, this is what we do, kind of describing the process. And the truth was, I didn't really love doing the work. A lot of people gravitated towards wanting me to pick out clothes for them, even though they understood what the process was. But there was certainly an element of that. And I, wanted to write this handbook. And the book started out as like a Marie Kondo meets, Julia Cameron's Artist's Way. And it was supposed to be like this holistic styling handbook. But as I was writing it, all of that fell away because I was doing so much personal storytelling to talk about the importance of the practices. And so like the entire initial kind of conceit of the book kind of came apart, and it turned into a memoir. But you can see where the title, Getting Dressed in the Dark, its roots.
Yeah. So that's an amazing way to start a book. It almost sounds like you became an accidental writer, kind of. You fell into it.
In some ways, that's true. I feel like when I started this book, even though, I think it was probably in 2021 or 2022. So it was significantly after that, like actual crisis in 2016. But I think in a lot of ways, I was still carrying a lot of that. Like, what am I going to do? How am I going to make a living? How can I be an artist? Like all of that stuff was still in the process of kind of coming back together in some way in a new life. And I actually had a really academic education, and a very like text heavy education. And I purposefully kind of gave up text and writing for my entire adulthood I found that I like hit a certain limit, and that I started going into practices like visual art, but also shamanic practice and meditation and psychic phenomenon, all sorts of marginalized meaning-making practices that weren't text-based, a lot of embodied practices. And so while I grew up with a really strong relationship to text, I felt like it wasn't doing the job I needed it to do in terms of getting at things that I felt like were true. And in some way, moving back to text was still part of like a compromise for me, because it felt like a more popular form and a more direct form of communication. But even though I had always written as part of my visual art practice, but the writing one does for visual art is in a different field than literary writing. Mm-hmm. And so it's a lot more experimental. So this, it brought me back to writing, and I'm grateful for that. And it's made me wrestle with those questions all over again about how to approach text and take with me everything that I value and have experienced in visual art, and still be able to somehow translate that into writing.
That's a really hard task, it seems. And Sommer, what inspired you to write a story about Hope? Is Hope a real town?
Hope is an imaginary town, though. Yeah, it's a completely imaginary, though I do think there is a tiny little town actually called Hope in Alaska, up in more towards the interior. So I spent a lot of my childhood, teen years growing up in Alaska, and my family's all up there still. And it's just one of the most beautiful places in the world. And there's something so haunting about it that just is just compelling. And I would say I've always had a love affair with the actual landscape of Alaska. It's truly astonishing. You can connect to the natural world, truly connect there. I think I started this is an old book. These stories are probably, 6 to 10 years old. So it's kind of fun to finally see it in a book. And I think I might have started writing them during my MFA program when I was pregnant with my second kid in like 2010 or so. And I think I might have just finished reading Sherwood Anderson's Winesburg, Ohio, which is a novel and story, maybe the first novel and stories. I think Olive Kittredge also is kind of like that, and was compelled by the idea that I had all these stories about these quirky characters in this, fabulous Alaskan town. And how could I bring it all together, and saw that you could do that. And though it was really organic, it just kind of, these characters just kind of wrote their own stories, were popping in and out. There are some stories that end kind of on a cliffhanger, but the final story kind of resolves it in a way.
Mhm.
And so I was just, there's definitely the Alaskan spirit is, you get a lot of people moving there who are either running away from something or wanting to find themselves, or, they have an adventuresome spirit. Often some really want to go out and just live off the land and, no modern conveniences. And that type of spirit is truly intriguing and can lead to a lot of conflict and a lot of personal turmoil, but a lot of fabulous things too. And then, so I'll stop there.
Well, you worked a lot of humor into your piece. I mean, that piece was hilarious.
Yeah.
Did you work to do that, or was that something that also became organic? Because that was, it sort of had echoes of The Gang That Couldn't Shoot Straight, kind of humor by Jimmy Breslin. So was that purposeful, or did it just because the characters were so quirky?
Definitely the latter. I have never thought that I was a funny person, and it's crazy because I'm writing this stuff now and I'm making myself laugh after the fact. It's funny, and it just came out that way. And I think some people are just so ridiculous that it is hilarious. And I think I do like to write satire, and so there's a bit of satire in this too.
So Gabriella, I noticed in your excerpt when you talked about the impervious house, you listed all the pie pans and all those cooking implements. Where did that come from?
I mean, it comes from my lived experience of my parents' house, certainly. But I think, there's several places in the book where there's a lot of lists of material things. And I feel like, this book is a book about art practice, like paintings and making quilts and textiles. But it's also a book about the intimacy with everyday things, the kind of creative relationship we have, with clothing, with our homes. And, I talk about the exigency of objects. Like there's storytelling in the relationships between objects. There's, our kind of, our relationship with things and how impactful that is. And also, I love like list poems. I talk about the dogs, being a kind of their own like unit between the four of them. I'm always kind of moved, at the grocery store. I feel like every person that, goes ahead of me, it's like a portrait in what they're purchasing from the grocery store. So I feel like the book is about creativity and intimacy and the material world. And so I think, the kind of like specifics of objects and groupings of objects is always very like interesting and moving to me. It feels like little stories in and of itself to have those kind of clusters of things.
Well, actually, both of your stories have that kind of cluster of things, because Sommer, in yours, you listed all the things that Larry was burying. Was it Larry or Mark that was burying that stuff? And also the little lady exploding because he forgot that there were things in the bottom of the boat that might have made it explode. the things that the 20-year-old guy who was working with the police got in a nondescript envelope. So talk about your relation with things. Like, how did this, you know,
Mm.
how did the drug thing come about? I mean, that's a pretty specific thing. Did that also grow organically? Did you have to do any research? Did either of you have to do any research for your stories?
Mm. Well, I love the idea of lists. I mean, I love how you say that, Gabriella. Like, lists can be a story. And yes, the vividness of those pots. I mean, I still have it in my head. Such a beautiful section, and the dogs being a poem. Yeah, so I don't know. I think the drugs were kind of definitely just, Larry. It just fit him, right? It just he walked right into it, and it seemed to fit his worldview at that time. And then there was a need, like, really, these are small communities in very rural Alaska. Can't drive to them, so he filled a need. He filled the niche there, and it was just super lucrative for him. But I also think, he's the type of guy who would do that. He's not
Yeah,
going
it
to
sounds like it.
books, or I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because the way you're describing these characters unfolding in this organic way, that kind of, it sounds like once you get started, he's the kind of guy that would do that. So it's like, I feel that. And, just to go back to the lists, I feel similarly, like once you start with a collection of things, there's only certain other things that fit in that list. It has its own like engine.
Yeah.
So Gabriella, you talked about making textiles. Is that something that you actually do? And is that represented in the book a little bit?
Yeah, it's represented in the book a lot. I've always been drawn to textiles. So I moved to Maine at a certain point in my early 20s, and I started, well, I always sewed, like, as a kid. At some point, I got a book on Amish quilts again in my early 20s, and I fell in love with quilt making, traditional quilt making. I moved to Maine. I started working as a costume designer for a professional theater. And soon I started doing quilting first full time. I was doing like the art and craft fair circuit nationally, and bringing quilts and selling them. And that's what I did for a while in my 20s. And then at a certain point, I cared more about what was happening conceptually with quilts, like what it meant to make handmade things that we lived with, what it means to be. I mean, there's no such thing as like an American manufacturing. Like, it's not something you can do for a living, is make art quilts. You can't compete. I mean, you see these beautiful quilts come out of India, and they're like, cents on the dollar, and they're all like hand stitched. So there was a lot to think about there as someone who was showing up and saying, well, pay this much for my handmade quilt, so that I can live here in Maine. It's like, you have to figure out, like, where's the value, and what are we doing, and what are we talking about when we're kind of dealing with these objects. And I really cared about the way that we live with objects, and the way we invest in them, and the way that things can be invested with meaning and shouldn't be so disposable, and all of these kinds of ideas. I found that just selling quilts wasn't dealing with that ethos of quilts as much as I wanted to. And so I moved into fine art. In a way, I stopped making functional quilts, and I made quilts that started to be displayed hanging on walls in art galleries. And it allowed me to get at more of that conceptual territory and have them as contemplative objects more than just functional objects. And from there, I've moved into many different, I've made videos and paintings and drawings, and I was doing writing. I have an MFA, but it's an interdisciplinary MFA in something called intermedia. So I consider myself really an interdisciplinary practitioner, and all of that is kind of detailed. That journey of like coming to one thing after another is all detailed in the book.
That sounds really interesting. So let's talk about our writing process. So Sommer, let's begin with you. What is your writing process? Do you keep journals? Do you write every day? Do you plot things out? Like, talk a little bit about how your approach to the craft of writing.
Yeah, I used to be a huge journaler throughout my, childhood into my young adult life and beyond. Don't journal so much anymore. And usually I just write if something pops up in my head. So I'm one of those people that I don't write on a schedule. And in fact, it doesn't help me to do that. So often, though, if I have the idea, I do have to make myself to sit down and write. I can think of 1,000 things to do other than write. But then there's that nagging feeling, I have to get it down. I have to develop this story. It's just so troubling and intriguing for me. There's a problem I need to solve, essentially, is when I sit down to write. It's like a puzzle. And a lot of times I don't have the plot figured out. Might have the ending written first and a beginning, and then trying to get there is just a fun thing to do. Sometimes it's just a character. So I have this fantastic character who already has a problem, and how can I put that into a story? But yeah, no routines for me, I must say. Just write when I want to.
Everybody writes in a different way, really. And what about you, Gabriella? What is your writing practice like?
Yeah, I'm probably similar to Sommer. I know you said you have children. I also have an 8-year-old. I feel like that kind of blows schedules out of the water. Yes. But I also, again, I feel like I am happy to engage creatively in so many different ways. So I have been doing a lot of painting and drawing for the past couple of years. In the past couple of years, also have become a master gardener. I spend a great deal of time in the garden. I really get a lot of satisfaction out of cooking and being in my home. So, I don't kind of have a hierarchy of creative activity. I feel like I'm really happy with the way that those things kind of inform one another. I try to really take the ethos from one creative place into another. And I can definitely get in the zone of a particular media for a while, but then I can be inspired elsewhere. Maybe a piece of writing, sparks the urge to write, or sometimes, making textiles. Like I have this kind of dialogue going in my head as I'm making it, and it's something that feels like it should be translated to writing. So.
Well, both books sound very intriguing. A lot of aspiring writers listen. I mean, they go back and listen. They may not listen while we're on, but they'll go back on YouTube or Instagram and listen. What advice do you have to aspiring writers? Each of you, whoever wants to go first.
I was asked this question recently in an interview, and I feel like so I've had a lot of time to think about it, and I still don't have a good answer. But something that I've thought to myself for a really long time in general is that I don't believe in advice. I believe in support. And I think that that's really, I stand by it in the sense that I feel like probably as a creative person, I figure it out. That's part of the process. I find my own way. I, make time when I need time. I have created a really weird life over many, many years. And in order to do that, I think I've mostly needed support, that to either have, whatever vision. I've needed, material support. I've needed emotional support. I think to have one's own kind of vision and to do creative work requires a lot of support. And so maybe finding support where you can, or tapping into it, or recognizing the spaces where it exists for you.
Yeah,
Sommer?
totally agree. And sadly, that's getting harder to find these days, financial support for artists. But I also want to tap into something you said, Gabriella. I feel like there is no prescription, right? That would be my advice, maybe. It is write for yourself and create the type of art you want to create for yourself, not for the audience, because the audience is fickle and really shouldn't be for them. So make sure you're getting fully immersed and in love with what you're doing. If you find like you can't write and you're just having a hard time with that writer's block or whatever it might be, that's your cue not to write, and go out and do something else. Take a walk, get into gardening. Maybe you just need to take a little break from it. Maybe you simply just need to start reading. So no prescription. Please don't be your own editor. Just write, don't self-edit, and make sure that you're able to find some satisfaction and joy for yourself in that process.
Thank you so much, both of you. So we're drawing to a close now. And I want to remind everyone that our next streamed readings is on November 26th, 8:30 Eastern Time, 5:30 Pacific Time. I want to thank both of you for sharing your work with us tonight. It was really wonderful and very inspiring to hear your work. I hope you'll join us again when we get together on the 26th of November is our next one, not the 29th. We are every other Wednesday. So I want to thank everyone. I want to thank everybody who watched and who will watch, and we will hope to see you again soon. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.